Okay, so in algebra, just as in life, there's often the easy way of doing things, and then there's the hard way of doing things, right? So we've all experienced those things, especially when you're learning something new. Okay, for the first time, it takes you a lot longer to do something, right? To master any skill, you're like, wow, that took me a long time. But as you continue to practice, you get better and better and better. So the first time out, it seems, things are difficult, but as you practice, things become easier. But in algebra, oftentimes we can approach solving equations in different ways, all right? And this particular equation you can solve in a couple different ways. And what we want to do here is always work smarter, not harder. So I like to see if you can actually solve this the easy way. Okay, there is an easier approach with the options that we have to solve this particular equation. Now, I'm going to get into the details of exactly, what type of equation this is and our options to solve it. And then obviously we're going to go through this in the most direct way. Now, the easy way sometimes isn't always just easy. It's just easier than your other options, right? Okay, so we're going to get into this in just 1 second. Now, by the way, too, if you think you can solve this, all right, definitely pause the video and go ahead and do so. And then, kind of compare your answer, one, and two, the method that you used. But the bottom line is if you're able to just solve this no matter what, oh, that's very good. Okay, so you can check your work here in just 1 second, but first let me quickly introduce myself. My name is John. I'm the founder of TabletClass Math. I'm also a middle and high school math teacher, and over several years I've constructed what I like to believe is one of the best online math help programs there is. Of course, I'll let you be the judge of that. If you're interested, you can check out my math help program by following the link in the description of this video. But basically, I have 100 plus different math courses ranging from pre-algebra, Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2. I'm going to be launching pre-calculus here. I'm finally finishing up the final touches in about a week. I should have that course out. But I also have many, many courses in the area of test preparation. So if you're studying for the GED, SAT, ACT, GRE, GMAT, ASVAB, Accuplacer, ALEX exam, maybe a teacher certification exam like the Praxis or nursing school entrance exam like the TAS. There's so many different exams out there that people have to take, and there's a lot of math on these exams. So if you don't do well in the math section, you do not do well on the exams, I can help you out with that, preparing and being successful on these exams. So just go to my website, check out my full course catalog. If I don't have your exam, drop me a line in my contact form and I'll help you out the best I can. I also do a lot with homeschooling. So if you homeschool, I have a great homeschool learning program, and then obviously help those of you that are just having a tough time in your current math courses. Now, if you are, truly serious about wanting to improve in math and learn math, then you got to be serious about your notes. Okay. Unfortunately, you're going to have to take great math notes. There's no shortcuts when it comes to putting in the daily work and taking great math notes. So I've been teaching math for decades, and it's apparent to me that the students that do take great notes, they always end up, with these nice, lovely grades at the end of the year. And then the reverse is true. Those students who were like me way back in the good old 1980s, I was taking notes, but I was talking to my buddies. I'm like, hey, what are we doing this weekend? Blah, 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 blah. I certainly wasn't doing the right thing. And if I had a cell phone back in those days, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't be making this video because I probably wouldn't have graduated. So, we live in a highly distracting world. I get it. Okay. It's hard to stay focused, but if you can't stay focused, you're going to have a tough time, not only in math, but anything else. All right. Focus is the key to success. All right. So work on your notes. But in the meantime, you can use my notes to still study from. So those would include pre-algebra, algebra 1, geometry, algebra 2, and trigonometry. You can find the links to those notes in the description of this video. All right, so let's go down and talk about this equation for a second. So in algebra, we first need to do a couple things here, right? So the first thing we have to do is identify what type of equation this is, right? So first of all, what kind of equation is this? Now, if you said quadratic equation, if you say, oh, this is a quadratic equation, then that's outstanding, okay? So I'm going to give you a little happy face for that. Very, very good, because at least you know what you're dealing with. This is a quadratic equation, which is technically a polynomial of degree 2. Now, I am using the variable g here. Some of you are like, oh, what about x squared? Does it have to be x? No, no, no. Does anything, as long as you have a variable squared, that's what really defines a polynomial. So we're using the variable g. No big deal. It's the same thing, okay, as if you were using a variable x. Perfect. Okay, so if you said quadratic equation, That's what this is. Now, what comes to mind when you're solving quadratic equations? Okay, let me move this little happy face out of the way here. All right, so what are our potential options here to solve a quadratic equation? That's the question, right? So let's talk about it. Well, in quadratic equations, sometimes you can take the square root of both sides. Now, in this particular equation, the way it's set up, we can't do that, okay? This would be for a scenario like x squared is equal to 16. Now, oftentimes, we want to try to factor, all right? That's an excellent way of doing things. And then if we can't do that, we have the quadratic formula, all right? So the quadratic formula, and what is the quadratic formula? So how many of you could right now write the quadratic formula out without looking at your notes? I certainly would strongly suggest this is one of these things that need to go into your long-term memory. But basically, it's x equals what? Minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so this is the quadratic formula, and you should know this by heart. Okay, so we have different options here. And by the way, there's something else called completing the square, which is like the long way of doing the quadratic formula, but it's something you're going to also need to know how to do. So you got different options here, okay? And some of these you can use, some you cannot, okay? But you always want to select the the easiest path here. So at this point in the video, I want to go ahead and have you think about this. If you feel like you're capable, you have enough math skills currently to solve this, go ahead and pause the video and solve it using one of these techniques, okay? Or try to use one of these techniques and see what you come up with, all right? Now, when we're faced with this particular option, what are we trying to do? We're trying to, always try to work easy. You don't feel guilty about, you're looking for the easiest path. Absolutely, I encourage you, please work smarter, not harder, okay? So, but we need to know what we're doing. We got to be able to practice this stuff. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get into the solution here. And if you don't want to see it, pause the video if you want to continue to work on this problem. Okay, here we go. So first things first, when obviously our quadratic equation has fractions. Or like, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to deal with fractions. Everyone's like, fractions. Let's get rid of the fractions. How can I get rid of fractions? Easy. I just multiply this entire thing by the LCD, and we can get rid of the fractions. So what's the lowest common denominator? I got 2, 12, and 6. Indeed, it is 12. Okay, so if you didn't know that, well, you got to work on your fractions, which I have a ton of videos on in my pre-algebra playlist. So that's the first thing. You just clear the fractions, multiply the entire equation by the LCD, which is 12. So I'm going to multiply 12 by each one of these terms in the equation, which I'm totally allowed to do in algebra. So I'm going to multiply 12 by g squared over 2. I get 6g squared, and then 12 times g over 12, I get g. You can see what's going on here, right? These 12s are cross canceling, and 12 times 1/6 is 2. All right, so this is our new equation. So this equation right here is equivalent to our original equation. We didn't break anything. It's just easier to work with these numbers. Okay, so if you did this, it was like your first inclination to do this, that's excellent. Okay, all right, so let's continue on here. All right, so you can see I'm already doing the work, but at this stage, you're thinking to yourself, what can I do? Well, because we have this g term, we can't take the square root of both sides. That's not an option for us, all right? You can only do that typically when you don't have this little middle term. So if you recognize this right off the bat, well, you can't do that, then what can we do? Well, at this point, you're going to have to start considering two options, okay? Factoring, okay, or the quadratic formula. So before we even consider that, I'm going to have to set this thing equal to 0. So that's my next move. So I'm going to move this 2 over there. Now I got this thing equal to 0. So now I'm left with this lovely little trinomial. So at this point, okay, you want to attempt to factor this, all right? We're like, okay, can I factor this? Because this is the easiest way. So is this thing factorable? The answer is yes. Okay, so just kind of like spoiler alert here, the easiest way to do this problem required two things. One, multiplying by the LCD and factoring. So If we, for example, I'll go back here, let's say right off the bat, you were like, I'm just going to go right into the quadratic formula with this, okay, or even the quadratic formula at this stage right here, well, you'd be taking the long route, okay? You'd ultimately still get the right answer, but it's not the easy way of doing things. Okay, so we can factor this. Now you can see here, I'm showing how to factor this trinomial. If you do not know how to factor trinomials, quadratic trinomials, polynomials, you're going to have a very, very difficult time in algebra. So I'm going to give you a couple suggestions here. One, I have tons of videos on factoring in my algebra playlist on my YouTube channel, or better yet, if you want to learn all this stuff, you might want to check out my Algebra 1 course in my math help program. But I'm using a particular technique. If you don't want to know what I'm doing, let me walk through it. What the heck? Let's go ahead and just quickly, I wrote it, so let me explain it. So what we do here, when this is in standard form, I take this 6 times -2. This is a technique. It's one technique to factor this. So if you don't know how to factor this, is one particular technique. So 6 times -2 is -12. Now I'm asking myself, what are the factors of -12? There's a bunch of factors, but 4 times -3 are factors of -12, and I'm interested in these pair of factors because 4 plus -3 is a positive 1. That fits this little center term right here, okay? Then I can use these guys, all right, to rewrite that positive 1 in the middle, and I can do group factoring. Bottom line is I end up with these two factors right here. So that's how the little work, I was almost like hesitant of saying, you know what, I'm not going to show the factoring work. You need to know how to go from here to here, okay? And there's a couple different approaches you could take, but if you don't know how to factor, you're going to have a very difficult time even passing algebra. All right, so if you're like, oh yeah, I'm really not that good at factoring, well, I would definitely, think of that as like a siren going off, like the police or something or the fire department. Like that's, a major, red flag that you got work to do. Okay, so you got to improve your factoring skills immediately. So you need to be able to factor from here to here. Okay, so once I got these factors, well, then this problem becomes uber easy, okay? Because I can use something called the zero product property. Let me just kind of scroll down here. So I got one thing being multiplied by another thing, and the answer is 0. So if I said, hey, I got something, and I multiply by something else, and the answer is 0, ask yourself, what are these numbers, okay? Well, you might be saying, well, one or both have to be 0. You can't multiply two numbers together and get an answer of 0 without one or both of these things being 0. And that's what we call the zero product property. And we love that. So when things are set, we have factors that are set equal to 0. It makes it super easy to solve because all we need to do is set each one of these factors, okay, this one and this one, we're going to set them equal to 0 because we know that one or both must be equal to 0 if the answer is 0. So we'll set both equal to 0 and we'll solve the respective equations. So we see here we have g is equal to -2/3. Of course, I'm doing basic algebra here. And g is equal to 1/2. So we got two answers as we expected because all quadratic equations have two solutions. Okay, they'll always have two solutions. And here we go. Here's the one and here's the other. Okay, so if you got this problem correct, all right, just by any method, I don't even care if you took the long way, whatever, it doesn't make a difference. I still must give you a pretty awesome, I'll give you a little bit of an A too, because you got it right, all right? So very, very good. However, if you did this the way I showed you, the most direct path, okay, well, then you get the bonus Mohawk, okay, from 1984, Flock of Seagulls. That was a great band. I think it was like 1983. Doesn't make a difference. We thought we were pretty cool, but you get that Mohawk today. You've earned it, and you get an A plus and a 100%. So this shows me you're definitely on the right track because not only are you kind of thinking in terms of, hey, what are my options? I want to be, most effective and direct path here. It shows me that you have multiple skills, factoring, how to find the LCD, etc. But you still need to keep this big picture in mind. When you're dealing with quadratic equations, oftentimes you can't factor, excuse me, so you do have to go into the quadratic formula, and you could be dealing with fractions and all kinds of good stuff. Quadratic formula problems can be challenging. Okay, you can have decimals and fractions, so you still need to know how to do all this stuff. Okay, however, we always want to work smarter, not harder in mathematics. Okay, all right, so hopefully this video was interesting and maybe a good little review for quadratic equations. And if that's the case, please consider smashing that like button. That helps me out. And if you're new to my YouTube channel, please consider subscribing. Been on YouTube for 10 plus years, have over 1,000 plus videos, basic to advanced mathematics on my channel. So my goal is to try to teach math in a clear and understandable way. Okay, try to make this stuff fun. I know a lot of you out there, maybe math isn't your favorite subject, but if you have to take math, you have to learn it. Well, let's make the most of it. Okay, so let's try to make it understandable, right? Because that's the key to success. Once you start understanding, you're like, oh, okay, this isn't as bad as I thought this was, all right? And then that leads you to success. So make sure you're doing your part. Make sure you're taking great math notes, talking to your math teacher. But beyond that, if you like my teaching style, please watch all the videos that I've done. Well, not all of them. That's just too much to watch. But find what you need within my playlist. And if you can't, my best math help will be within my math help program. Okay, so with that being said, I definitely wish you all the best in your mathematics adventures. Thank you for your time and have a great day.